Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Let's Talk and Learn, a podcast where we explore new ideas, learn, and grow together. I'm Mary Joyce, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you here for yet another episode in our series, Reality is So Unreal. Listeners, in this series, I have chosen a topic which is very challenging but explores the hidden truths of our everyday life. So, we are going to find insights that can help us to live better and more authentically and face this situation in a more practical manner. So, for today's episode, we are going to explore stress, but with a very special focus on caregiver stress, an experience that so many face in today's challenging world, but very few really understand the depth of it. This episode is designed to guide us through the complexities of caregiver stress, and I'm going to approach this in three parts, each with its own unique focus to deepen our understanding and offer some practical help. Whether you are caring for a loved one or you know someone who is in the caregiving role, be kind and empathetic and appreciative to them, as this role listeners can be rewarding but also extremely challenging. So, in these episodes, we'll dive into the psychological and societal factors that shape caregiver stress and explore some ways to recognize and manage it. So, listeners, we'll kick things off by exploring and understanding caregiver stress and examining the weight of societal expectations on them. We look at how these expectations impact caregivers, creating an additional pressure and even leading to imposter syndrome. I'll just give you a little bit of brief description of what is imposter syndrome. So, imposter syndrome is a feeling of being not good enough despite all we do. So, in this part one, we'll try and explore ways to challenge these expectations and break through the self doubt. For part two of the episode, we'll get hands on with managing caregiver stress. I will share some practical exercises and helpful philosophical perspectives to give you tools to handle stress more effectively and find moments of peace in the midst of the chaos. In part three, finally, we will dive into caregiver stress theory. We look at this research behind caregiver stress to explore concepts that can offer fresh insights into the emotional and mental demands of caregiving and understand how our minds process this unique type of stress. So, whether you are a caregiver or you know someone who is or are simply curious about the topic, today's episode is for you. So, listeners, we are going to embark on a journey into the realities of caregiving, a role that in a given moment of time, each one of us would be welcomed to. So, we have to appreciate, understand the challenges that caregivers face and how we can learn to support ourselves or others more fully. So, let's jump in. So, for the part one, let's start with a simple question. What is stress? Psychologically, stress, as we know, is our body's response to any threat that environment poses on us. When we face a challenge, our bodies prepare or go into this fight or flight. Now, while stress is helpful in short bursts, it becomes a problem when it is constantly there. Now, there are positives and negatives stress factors, but I'm talking about a continuous demand to care for someone without adequate breaks. This definitely is going to impose a negative stress, as we call a chronic stress. So, now here is the disconnect. Society often holds an idealized view of caregivers, expecting them to embody endless patience, selflessness, and strength. Think of the caregiver as a hero figure who can somehow handle everything without ever reaching a breaking point. And while caregiving is an act of love, selfless love, this expectation to many degree is unrealistic because we are expecting this from a human being, and it is bound to create an immense pressure. According to the National Alliance for Caregiving, chronic stress can lead to burnout, physical ailments, and mental health struggles for the caregivers. There's a lot of evidence that supports this. So, the more we understand this, the more we can start to move past the notion that caregivers must do it all. As we move on, there is a factor that often intensifies stress, and this is imposter syndrome. Many caregivers struggle with the feelings like, am I doing enough? Or someone else would do this better than me. Even when providing genuine support, these caregivers feel inadequate. And this mental battle with imposter syndrome can be deeply isolating and exhausting, making it harder for caregivers to ask for help or even take break or even take care of their own health and well-being. This factor becomes so overwhelming that it can go into the realms of self-negligence. When caregivers are already pushing themselves, imposter syndrome can turn into a vicious cycle with feelings of inadequacy that drives them to an overextent, which increases stress, eventually leading to burnout. Many caregivers report physical symptoms like chronic pain, insomnia, fatigue that not only mimic all the other symptoms that they already might be facing and affect them, but also compromise the quality of care they can give. Caregivers are at a high risk of physical and mental health issues directly related to the demands of caregiving. This is what reads out in the ARP report. So, with all this evidence that's already out there that supports that there is a thing called caregivers burnout, why is there not so much awareness to support these people? So, how will we break the cycle and reframe these expectations? So, for one, both caregivers and society need to reframe some of these expectations by giving this caregiving demanding role attention and recognition and support, just like any other roles. This means creating space for caregivers to take breaks, to set boundaries, and to prioritize self care. When caregivers recognize their limits and focus on what they can control, they can start to break out of the feedback loop that leads to burnout. In European countries, you do get breaks or do get supports from your government with the help of caregiver schemes. In the words of philosopher Victor, finding purpose in our actions, in difficult ones or even difficult ones, can help us to cope. The impact of every small act of care is meaningful, even when it's imperfect. So, even when a caregiver invests in a practical approach to manage the situation, the person is investing in caregiving. Now, listeners, in the end, caregiving isn't about meeting an ideal or managing an ideal situation. It's about doing the best you can and remembering that your efforts matter. Now, let me introduce a tool to help caregivers manage stress with insights from philosophy and psychology. So, as we discussed, caregiving can feel like an unending responsibility or a loop. So, let's look into Stoicism, which teaches resilience by encouraging us to focus only on what we can control. And this is a huge factor, listeners, because when we start controlling every situation, we are putting an undemanding pressure, which is very unnatural on us. So, for caregivers, this might mean letting go of expectation to do it all and do it all alone, and instead finding value in the small acts of care provided each day. And these acts can lead to more positive outcomes. Another powerful perspective comes from Viktor Franklin, who believes that even in the most difficult situation, we have the freedom to choose our response. And when I say care in caregiving, the response mostly it is good and has a good outcome if it's a positive response. Like they say, do it with a smile on your face because that is what the other person would get more out of. So, this choice of our ability to find meaning in the moments we spend caring for others can be a source of strength. It's a reminder that caregiving, while challenging, is also an act of purpose and compassion. So, by redefining success in caregiving, we can recognize that every small act of support is enough. Now, let me put forth a small NLP practice to manage caregiver stress. Now, this visualization can help you externalize stress, making it feel less overwhelming. So, if you're in a comfortable space, we will start this exercise. Like always, I would say take a moment to relax. Close your eyes if you're comfortable to do so. Bring to mind a specific source of stress. It could be a worry about a loved one's health, a new diagnosis, a feeling of being overwhelmed, or perhaps the isolation you feel. Just hold that thought for a moment without judgment. Now picture this stress as if it were an object in front of you, a heavy rock or a tangled rope, whatever represents how it feels. Externalizing it gives you a way to visualize your relationship, listeners, with this stress. Imagine altering this image. Picture the rock getting smaller or the rope slowly untangling. Sometimes visualizing a change in certain situations with these external factors helps you regain a sense of control over how you relate to stress. Now recall a moment when you felt calm, even if it was brief. Let this feeling expand around you and surround your image of stress. Picture this sense of calm enveloping the stress object until it feels lighter or even fades away. Let this image of stress, which is a rock, be covered by the bright light and so fully covered and immersed that you can't see the rock at all. When you're ready, let the image dissolve completely, bringing a sense of calm. A calmness into your heart, into your soul, into your body. And slowly open your eyes. Now, this is a reminder that you can choose to approach your stress with a different perspective and get more positive outcomes, which would be beneficial for you and for the person that you're providing care to. Thank you for participating in this exercise with me. Stress, particularly caregiver stress, is something that requires an ongoing awareness and management strategy. So, recognizing what is your best fit and reframing societal expectations in what society you live in can free you and give the best outcomes. And remember, self care isn't selfish, it's essential to your ability to care for others. I hope that this episode offers you a little more peace and resilience in your caregiving journey. If you found this helpful, please consider subscribing, sharing with others, and of course, giving yourself some well deserved rest. So, I will meet you again in the next part 2 of this episode, where we will look into the traditional society pressures that were there on the caregivers and take it further on. Thank you.